introduction. I'm originally from Argentina. I came to the US right after high school, went first to California, and then was accepted into the University of Miami to do my PhD. And then I arrived from California on August 10th, 1992. And if you were here back then, you know that date rings a bell because it was a couple of weeks before Hurricane Andrew hit, and so I dragged my wife across the U.S., left California where she had a fantastic job working in a graphic design studio to come to California to Miami. We were in boxes. We rented a little tiny house in Mendoza Street in Coral Gables. And by the way, I'm a Coral Gables resident now, going on for 32 years. And so that's where we were when Hurricane Andrew hit. And initially, I was coming to Florida to work on fish. So that's what I had done before in California. But then the first time I was able to dive on a reef here in South Florida, in Miami, I saw the destruction that Hurricane Andrew caused on some of these beautiful near shore coral reefs that were once dominated by branching corals that looked much like trees. And so, I looked around, and then right away it became apparent that, destiny had brought a new project onto my doorstep. So I spent the following 30 some years looking at the physical impacts of storms on tree-like corals. And what happens to corals when they get hit by storms or anchors or ships is they fragment. And as I will tell you shortly, corals are able to benefit from fragmentation much like plants are able to, because they are clonal, they are colonial. So you can break a coral in two and end up with two corals, unlike a fish, which you break up into two and you have two portions, but they won't grow back. So I was able to use my expertise that I've developed over the past 30 years on the disturbance ecology of corals to then grow a second career on restoration. So after watching corals die for 20 some years, I was able to turn that around and learn from that in terms of what makes corals susceptible or resistant to disturbance, and then use that information to grow corals and recover these ecosystems that are so beautiful and give so much to us. So what I'll do now is I'll go through my slides, and I'm going to ask you to please stop me if I'm going too fast or if there's a question, or at least type it into the chat so at the end we'll be able to go back and I'll be able to answer your questions. So let me just share my screen. And can everybody see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So restoring the future of coral reefs. That's where we are today. But before we get into the actual restoration, I want to take you through the process or the steps that got us here and why we actually need to be doing this work. Much rather be doing something else. But this is where we are today. So we are now trying to actively restore coral reefs, one coral at a time. So, a little background on coral reefs and, the most diverse marine ecosystems in the world. They hold the bulk of the biodiversity, even though they only occupied a small fraction of the ocean seafloor. They are composed or created by a whole different range of coral morphologies. And this is where, the work that I do overlaps with the work that you guys do with your passion. So, our passions are lined up. And so much like you have different shapes of plants and trees, you have different shapes of corals. And we're focusing on the corals that provide the bulk of the structure, because in coral reefs, structure and function go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. You need to have structurally complex coral reefs to be able to sustain the services that they provide to us. So what you see here on the top are the two branching species that provide the majority of the structure to shallow coral reefs. And again, they look much like trees. You have a robust morphology on your left, that's the elkhorn coral, and on the right, you have the staghorn coral. And these are the two fastest growing corals in the Caribbean and in Florida. And we're focusing much of the work that we do on these species because they grow so fast, but they're also very important for the structure of the reefs. And down below, you have the more massive coral morphologies, kind of the old growth of the coral reefs. They grow very slow, but they tend to persist, they stick around. So when you come across a branching coral that's, let's say, a meter in diameter, you're looking at a coral colony that's probably 20 to 25 years old. When you come across a massive or brain coral colony that's about a meter in diameter, it's kind of the size of your desk, for example. Now we're talking about hundreds of years old. Some of these coral colonies have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so, think about coral mortality and what you lose when you lose these corals. And also think about restoration. So we're only restoring a fraction of what we lose. Even if we do plant thousands of corals, again, how long does it take to recover a 100-year-old coral? It takes 100 years. So, think about that as we move forward. So the amazing thing about corals and coral reefs is that the building block of these structures that we can see from space are really just tiny, tiny coral polyps. And when you think about a coral polyp, you need to visualize an upside down jellyfish because that's what corals are. They're basically little tiny jellyfish that are able to build their own house around them. They are able to deposit calcium carbonate and create skeletons. But the animal part of a coral colony is the coral polyp, and they're tiny, 2-3 millimeters in diameter, and they look just like an upside down jellyfish because they have a very simple body plan and they have tentacles. So what you see in this picture, all of those fuzzy tentacles, that's what corals use to feed themselves. They capture little tiny particles in the water column and they feed themselves through that. So every single one of those little coral polyps combines to create these beautiful coral colonies, which in turn combine to create the beautiful coral reefs that we know and love. So you can think of a coral polyp as a Lego. Each one of those coral polyps by itself really doesn't do much. But when you combine them, you can create beautiful structures. And that is basically what a coral colony is. So the picture at the bottom shows over 100 individual coral polyps, and you can see their mouths and you can see their tentacles extended. They combine together to create these coral colonies. And again, coral colonies combine together to create coral reefs. So when people ask me what a coral is, the usual answer is it's a combination of the coral animal, which is the jellyfish-like organism, plus a symbiont that lives within the coral tissues that is a little tiny microalga called a dinoflagellate that lives within the coral tissue. And you can see all of those dots on the tentacle of the coral on your right. All of those little tiny dots are little tiny microalgae that are found within the coral polyp. And they live together, the coral animal and the microalga, they live together in symbiosis, which means they both benefit from this partnership that they've established over millions of years. So the coral colony, the coral animal.
I would see whether the bathroom upstairs needed to be cleaned. I don't think I cleaned them.
Not the bathroom. Yes. All right.
So what do the two partners get? So the coral host, the animal, gets all of the carbon-based products of photosynthesis because the symbionts, the microalgae, are photosynthetic, like plants. They soak up the energy of the sun and create sugars, lipids, fatty acids that they can then share with the animal host. And the algae, what they get out of the partnership and the symbiosis is they get the byproducts of respiration. So they get nutrients from the animal host, and they also have a cozy home where they can live. So that's where the partnership comes in. And then together they work to secrete the calcium carbonate that we see as coral skeletons. So that is the mineral part of the coral colony. So we have a coral host, that's a jellyfish-like organism. We have the microalgae that are called dinoflagellates, and then we have the skeletons that get deposited by the symbiosis that create the hard structures that you see on coral reefs. All right, so why are we here today? Because we've lost so much over the past few decades. So, this can easily be the stock market in March of 2020, but unfortunately it isn't. Why? Because the stock market has recovered and coral reefs have not recovered. And the decline of coral reefs has been steady over the past 4 to 5 decades. So starting in the 1970s, we've seen coral reefs being influenced, impacted by a large, long list of disturbances that include overfishing, coastal development, diseases. We've lost sea urchins, which are the main grazers on coral reefs. So we've had climate change impacts, temperature, changes in water chemistry. We've had hurricanes, and the most devastating disturbance that we've had over the past 5 years on our local coral reefs is the stony coral tissue loss disease. So starting in the area around the port of Miami in 2014, coinciding with the dredge, the expansion of the port of Miami, we started to see an unprecedented number of coral species and coral colonies being impacted by disease. We still don't know what's causing this disease, whether it's of viral or bacterial origin, but what's happened since then is this disease has expanded, has moved with the currents north all the way up to West Palm Beach and down south all the way up to Key West, and it's also crossed beyond Florida into the Caribbean. We have over 20 coral species that are now affected by this disease that originated in Miami and is now migrated to other areas in the Caribbean. And when the disease hits, coral colonies die very quickly, almost overnight. So we're talking about hundreds of years of coral growth being lost within a few days. So this is a devastating disease that is now affecting our coral reefs. But nevertheless, this is where we are today. So if you were diving or went snorkeling 50 years ago onto your typical South Florida coral reef, you would have seen more than 50% of the bottom being occupied by stony corals, these beautiful corals that we all know and love. Now, if you go diving on an average coral reef here in South Florida, less than 5% of the bottom is occupied by stony corals. So we've lost that much over 50 years. So again, I mentioned structure and function. When you lose corals, you lose structure. When these coral colonies die, they crumble because they're impacted by waves, by erosion. They just basically become sand. And when you lose structure, you lose the protection that coral reefs provide to our shorelines. So here in South Florida, we have the most vulnerable and valuable shoreline in the US. Think about the shoreline of Miami Beach, from South Beach all the way up to the northern counties. You have them, again, the most valuable property located within a couple hundred yards of our reef. So we need the coral reefs to be able to provide physical defense against incoming waves and storms. When you do have a healthy reef near shore in shallow water, you can buffer that. The structure of a healthy reef can buffer, can take away, can diminish more than 90% of the energy of incoming waves. So that is our first line of defense against storms. All of the coastal flooding that we see can be mitigated, or much of it can be mitigated, by having healthy coral reefs in front of our shoreline. So we lose that structure, we lose that protection, and protection can be translated into cost savings. Okay, because we know how costly these flooding events are to our local economy. So we need to recover coral reefs because of the coastal protection value they provide. But we also need to recover coral reefs because we love to fish on them, we love to snorkel on them. They provide the basis of the economy and the Keys. People go to the Keys to enjoy the benefits that healthy coral reefs provide. They want to see clean beaches, they want to see with sand that's created by coral reefs when they break down. All of the sand in our beaches is created by calcifying organisms like corals when they die and break down. So we need a constant source of sand for our beaches. They obviously, provide coastal protection. They provide educational opportunities. That's why I'm here today, and the basis for tourism industry is all based on the health of our coral reefs. So what are some of the stressors, disturbances that impact coral reefs? We have a whole long list of different stressors. We have temperature, we have competition from macroalgae, from sponges, we have sedimentation, we have diseases, we have coral bleaching that's caused by high temperatures, we have predation, we have water quality issues whenever we have a brown tide or a red tide or a black tide. Those are all factors that influence the health of our shorelines and our coral reefs. And then we have physical impacts. We have storms. And I've been in Florida for 30 years. The University of Miami has had, over the past 30 years, 4 research vessels. And you can probably guess how many of those research vessels have run aground on a local coral reef. All 4 of our vessels have run aground, causing major damage to our coral reefs. So we're not exempt from causing the physical impacts on our coral reefs. But the most concerning driver of coral decline is by far climate change, and more specifically, high temperatures, increased ocean temperatures. Ocean warming is the #1 driver of coral reef declines in Florida and around the world. There's no discussion about that. So corals, when they bleach, they lose their macroalgae, the little tiny organisms that live within their tissue that supply them with 90% of the food they need, sugars, lipids. They go away, they disappear, they leave their coral host. There's a breakdown in the symbiosis when the warm temperatures hit. That's why corals who get their coloration mainly from their little tiny microalgae, look white when a bleaching event hits. That's why it's called a bleaching event, because everything turns white. So corals are still able to survive for a little while after their algae leave, but within weeks they basically starve to death. That's why coral bleaching and warming temperatures are so damaging to our coral reefs. If you haven't had a chance, I encourage you guys to look up Chasing Coral, which is a Netflix documentary that focuses on coral bleaching. It's got beautiful, dramatic imagery, and it brings to the forefront the challenge that corals and coral reefs face because of ocean warming and climate change. Ocean warming and bleaching events are very common now. We're getting into a cycle where we see a mass coral bleaching event every couple of years. The Great Barrier Reef, you probably have read this in the news, has been hit by 3 bleaching events over the past 5 years. That's unprecedented for the Great Barrier Reef. I had escaped major bleaching events for a long time. In 2014 and 2015 here in South Florida, we had the first back-to-back years of severe bleaching on record. So this is becoming a more frequent and more common disturbance event. And once we get to year returns, yearly bleaching, coral reefs have a very hard time recovering. So when we lose corals, we lose all of those services that they provide. Everything that coral reefs provide to us, basically it's gone when we lose the living corals. So, and you can translate that into billions of dollars of lost revenue and ecosystem services when we lose them. So we have very strong economic motivation for restoring our coral reefs. So the question is, what are we doing here at UN? So like I said, my second career is being focused on reef restoration. And you don't know me, but if you knew me, you know that I'm the type of person that can't keep a plant alive. Plants have come to my house to die for decades, so I'm the least likely person to be doing this work. But for some reason, I'm able to keep corals alive when I can't keep plants alive. So this combination of coral gardening and coral restoration is actually it's been really good for us. So the work that we do is based on four pillars. The actual restoration work that we do, where we grow corals, both in the field and here at UM, and then we plant them in the thousands, like Susan said. We also focused on adaptation, because if you just collect corals, grow corals, and plant corals, you're basically enhancing the cycle. You're just feeding the fire, because you're growing the next set of climate victims. The drivers that cause the decline are not going away. So what we're doing is what we're trying to do is to use selective breeding. And again, all of these terms come from the gardening field. So we're basically just borrowing from the work that you and other groups have done over the past few decades, and adapting and adopting those techniques to coral reefs. So we're trying to select the more resistant coral genotypes, focusing on those. We're trying to stress harden some of the corals that we plant by giving them just a little bit of stress to see if we can ramp up their immune response, and getting ready for the next bleaching event. We're also now getting into gene editing. We're trying to create a super coral that will survive the next bleaching event, that will survive the next storm. So we're working on adaptation at the same time. We're working on coastal resilience, trying to rebuild our reefs, again, for coastal protection, but we also have a strong emphasis on education. The idea is to use the power of education to enhance the reach of our restoration work. So we use the coral gardening approach. And again, this is going to be very familiar to you guys because you do this on a weekly basis in your gardens. We go out and collect small pieces of living corals. Okay, we don't have a lot of corals left, so we can't just go out and collect as much as we want. Okay, we can't rob Peter to give to Mary, or however that goes, because there isn't enough to go around. So we need to be able to just expand our stocks by collecting a small fraction of what's out there. And we collect small pieces. Again, remember that these are clonal organisms. You can grow corals from fragments, and that's what we do. So we spend much of our energy and our resources in the nursery phase. So we get these fragments, we put them into protected environments, we clean structures on a weekly basis, we talk to them, we give them all of our love, because this is where they grow. We need them to grow healthy and grow fast. So the idea is to never go back to the wild reefs. Once we have a good stock, the idea is not to go back and recollect, because again, if we have a successful nursery, we shouldn't need to go back to the wild populations. Once we have enough genotypes and enough biomass within our nurseries, then we go out and restore reefs. We replant these depleted, impacted reefs, and we're now able to grow thousands and thousands of corals within our nurseries and plant just as many on a yearly basis on our Miami reefs. The goal is for these corals to grow in time and then recover themselves. Because while we can do a lot of work through asexual propagation, fragmentation, pruning, we need corals to sexually recover. We need corals to be able to spawn, for the gametes to meet, for the larvae to be successful, and then recover populations on their own. Anything we do, even if we spend all of our lifetimes doing asexual propagation, can pale in comparison to a successful mass spawning event. So we're working towards creating reproductive pockets, reproductive reefs that are able to recover themselves. I don't want to be doing this in 20, 30 years time. I want to be done. I want to move on to something else. So the idea is to give coral populations a push in the right direction so that they can recover themselves. And we use all sorts of different creative ways of growing corals in the field. We have lines, we have blocks, we have coral trees. So the structure that you see in the top right that looks like a Christmas tree, that is the structure that's being used around the world to grow corals. This is a PVC tree that has fiberglass arms, and we attach little coral fragments like Christmas tree ornaments, and they grow. They love growing on these hanging structures. We suspend them with a buoy on the top, and we attach them with anchors to the bottom, and they do their thing. They grow very, very fast. So I'm going to give you a little flavor of of what we do. So this is an animation that one of my students did that shows the work that we do when we grow these corals and plant them. So these are the corals growing in our nurseries. We go out there and we collect from our hanging trees small little pieces, fingerlings, from the different structures that we have. And again, they grow very, very fast. So we're able to double our biomass every 6 months or so. And then we collect those and we plant them onto our reefs. Now that's the process that gets played around and around every day that we go out there. What's interesting, I think it'll be interesting to you to understand, is why this is so successful. So what we documented in our nurseries is something that gardeners have known for decades. There's such a thing called pruning vigor, which is basically, it's beneficial for mature plants or trees to be pruned every once in a while. It rejuvenates them. It makes them grow faster. And you also end up with a whole bunch of little pieces of trees, or in this case, corals, that you can then replant and grow. So what we've been able to show, the two graphs on the top are basically 8 months of growth. So the one on the left, top left, that's a little tiny coral fragment that was collected from a wild colony. And then the one to its right that says 8 months shows 8 months worth of growth of those exact same fragments. So we did that, and then we went back and we repruned the same coral colonies. Okay, so we went back and took off the top, and then we tracked the growth of the same coral fragments over 8 months. And you can see on the bottom right that we got a lot more growth the second time around. That is a really evident representation of pruning. That tells you that whenever you sequentially prune corals, they grow much, much faster. And we're able to exploit that. We're able to use this to grow our biomass, because that's what we do. We grow, we prune, we grow, we prune. So very fast, we increase our biomass exponentially because of pruning vigor. And this is what we've documented. Pruning vigor in corals. Corals like to be cut up into small pieces because it rejuvenates them. They now allocate all of their resources to growth, and they grow very fast. So we're doing this up and down Miami-Dade County. We have in-water coral nurseries just outside Key Biscayne, just outside Elliott Key, and just outside Broad Key in Biscayne National Park. And all of those green dots show you where we planted corals over the past 10 or 11 years. So we now have over 20,000 coral colonies that have been replanted onto these reefs. And the sad thing is that sometimes you go to these reefs and you see a lot of staghorn coral, for example, and you come back and feel good about it. It's amazing. But the sad thing is that the only corals that you see on that reef are nursery grown corals. But nevertheless, we're working hard to recover these reefs. We have amazing success in terms of our survivorship. More than 85% of our corals get to 1 year. We're now expanding beyond the branching corals to include some of the slower growing corals. And we're also working hard to make them more climate resistant, more climate resilient. So one of the most exciting news that we had over this past miserable year is that for the first time, we saw nursery grown corals that we planted on our local reef spawn, go through this sexual reproductive event. And that's what we need for recovery. So I'm going to show you a quick video. So this is a colony of staghorn coral that was grown in our nurseries, planted onto a reef in Miami-Dade County, and we monitor sexual spawning activities in August and September. It usually happens at night. And what you will see is from every single one of these coral polyps, the Legos that we discussed early on, you will see a small gamete bundle being released. So this is a combination of eggs and sperm that get released from these coral polyps. They go up to the surface, they break down, the gametes, the sperm and the eggs mix, and they create coral babies. So this past year, we all became coral grandparents because our initial collections now are sexually mature. Are you guys seeing this? Can you see
No,
the?
we're not seeing this.
Ooh, that's strange.
We didn't see the animation either.
Oh, you didn't see the animation either. Oh, well, I should have spoken up. Let me see if I can fix that. How about now?
Not yet.
No? Okay, so I'm gonna send you the video so you can watch it at your leisure because for
Thank
some
you.
reason it's not playing. So this brings us to Rescue a Reef. So we realized that even if we worked as hard as we could, we were just a few practitioners doing all of this work. So we needed help, and the best available help is the public around you. And so we were able to expand our reach and our activities by including citizen scientists around us. So this is what Rescue a Reef does. It brings our work to the public, so we're able to benefit from the help that we get at no cost to our program from people like you. So what do we do? So the centerpiece of our Rescue a Reef program is our Key Biscayne expeditions. We go out to the nursery. We take both divers and snorkelers on these trips, so you can participate whether you dive or not. And then you get to see our coral nursery. If you're a diver, you get to clean our structures because they grow macroalgae and sponges and fire coral. So we need to get rid of that so the corals can grow healthy. And then in the second dive, you come out to the reef with us and you plant corals. You basically do the same work that we do with 20 years of schooling by just coming out with us, taking a short 30-minute presentation or listening to a 30-minute presentation, going out and planting corals. So we were able to reach milestones that we couldn't if it's just the five of us doing this work. So now we've had more than 60 expeditions, all out of Key Biscayne. We've been able to reach out more than 700 citizen scientists who've planted more than 20% of our corals. So more than 20% of the corals that our program has planted have been planted by members of the public. And this is what we've done. We've been able to turn sites that look like this to sites that now look like this. So this is a very powerful technique, and anybody can join us and anybody can do this work. So I want to finish off by telling what you can do to restore our local coral reefs. First of all, you need to care. Okay, if you care, then you're halfway there. Learn, and this is what you're doing today. You're listening to me go on and on about coral reefs. And there's other resources online. I'll be more than happy to share those with you. We're not the only group doing this work in Florida or around the world. Share what you learn with your family members. That's the most powerful way to share a message, and then vote accordingly. Florida is ground zero for this type of work. So we need to have citizens that are engaged in the stewardship of our resources, whether you care about the Everglades, whether you care about Biscayne Bay, whether you care about our coral reefs. You can help those resources by being very selective in terms of how you vote. You can also donate to our program or any other NGO, and there's many of them doing excellent work here in South Florida. You can volunteer with us. You can volunteer with any of a large number of NGOs that are doing amazing work here in South Florida. But if you're able to come out, then we would love to have you on one of our expeditions. You can dive in and actually do the work that we do. Quickly, I want to thank my sponsors. We have a whole bunch of different corporate sponsors that have helped us grow over the years. We get most of our funding from the government, but we do have a lot of corporate sponsors that are listed here. And finally, here's our contacts. If you're interested in getting more resources to share outside this group, we'll be more than happy to do that. So thank you for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Oh, no.
And be welcome to answer any questions either now. I don't know if you have any group business or by email. I'll keep writing my blogs, which I enjoy tremendously, and so I'll keep you up to date on what it is we are doing here at UM. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of questions, Judy.
I only have one chat here, and it's Joanne Matthews. Reefs at bottom, waves at top. How is it that reefs affect the waves?
Well, anytime you have structure on the bottom, if it's shallow enough, the wave will feel that structure. So the friction that the bottom structure causes slows down the energy of the waves. It lowers wave height and it takes away wave energy. Of course, it has to be high up on of the bottom, and it has to be shallow, and it has to be near shore. So we have a really neat tool here at UM. Again, once we are back and running again, I'd love to have you guys come over and visit our lab. We do lab tours all the time.
Oh, great.
So we have a wave tank. We have the largest wave and wind simulator in the world here in Key Biscayne. It's called the Sustain Tank. It's just a massive wave tank, and it can simulate up to Category 5 waves and wind. So what we've done is, at scale, obviously, because these are models, we've created different types of bottom structures, and with and without corals. And we were able to show that a breakwater style structure can remove more than 80% of the wave energy. But if you add living corals onto it, because of the added friction that corals provide, then you get a gain of 15% more. So combine the reef structure itself with healthy corals on top can mitigate more than 95%, and it's all done through friction.
Amazing. We have one more question. Betsy Tillman asked, are you working with elkhorn coral yet?
Yes, we are. The problem that we have with elkhorn coral is that there's so very few colonies left in the wild that we don't have a really good stock to collect from, but we need to, because these are the massive morphologies that take the brunt of the wave. So we are, just to give you an idea, probably 90% of our nursery is focused on staghorn. So we have right now about 5,000 staghorn coral colonies growing in our nurseries from 50 genotypes. We have less than 500 elkhorn colonies growing in our nurseries. So it's a 90-10 split. There's other practitioners in the Keys that have a lot more elkhorn, but just to give you an idea, there's very few colonies left north of Fowey Rocks in the northern Florida Reef Tract, but we are trying to. And we're also working with aquaria. So the Florida Aquarium is a really good partner, and they're growing corals from larvae. So we get a supply of about 1,000 elkhorn coral babies every year that we plant. And so, we're trying to expand beyond staghorn.
Great.
I think that's all. So far, that's all the questions we have. Susan, anything?
I just have, with COVID, are you having tours to your lab now?
Not right now, because we're limited in terms of how many people we can fit within our labs, but we just resumed our rescue reef expeditions. But as soon as we were allowed to bring groups in, we'll be more than happy to host you. It'll be a while for outside groups to be allowed, but
Terrific.
soon,
Thank you so
hopefully.
much,
Fingers
Dr.
crossed.
Lirman.
It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. We got so much more information, and I know that we do have a person in our club, Sharon Turbovich, who has a very a position within the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs, and it's the Coral Reef Restoration Committee. Sharon, would you like to say a word? Oops, you need to unmute, honey.
Certainly, I can't say anything that was more important than what Dr. Lirman has said. It's really valuable research. I don't think people realize the effect that corals have on us every day, not just for weather and food kind of thing, but it's now becoming very important for medicinal purposes too. So it's really exciting.
Mm, mm. Wow. Well, thanks, Sharon. And thank you, Dr. Lirman, again. We really appreciate you giving us this presentation, and wish you the best of luck. And when things open up, maybe a few of us will come diving with you.
I'd love to see you either on the boat or at the lab. Thank you. I'm going to sign off.
Thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Wow. Well, I really enjoyed that. Okay. I guess going on with our after the program.